People are awake and fighting today, not for ourselves, but for future generations. And thank you all for the fight that is being waged. This never makes us cry. We will not tremble. We will face it. We will fight for true independence, for our freedom.
For the first time in modern African history, a nation stood before the world and said, "We will build it ourselves. No loans, no aid, no permission needed." Burkina Faso, once called one of the poorest nations on earth, made a quiet announcement. No fireworks, no national celebrations, no CNN headlines. Just a single line that shook the ground beneath their feet. "We will build the largest road network in Africa's history with our own hands." $200 billion. 10 times the nation's entire GDP. A dream so impossible that the world laughed. But while they laughed, something began to move. Bulldozers rolled out of hangars, engines roared across the Sahel, and children climbed to the rooftops to witness the first roads touching the lands no one ever cared to pave. If you believe in an Africa that rises on its own, subscribe now for stories the world never told you. It happened quietly, almost like a whisper in history. On March the 3rd at dawn, the streets of Ouagadougou stirred not with protests, not with speeches, but with the hum of engines. Across 18 provinces from the dusty Sahel to the lush valleys of Santa Sud, heavy equipment appeared as if it had been hidden beneath the ground, waiting for its moment. In less than a week, over 900 machines, bulldozers, rollers, graders were deployed across the nation. No IMF logos, no World Bank consultants, only the Burkinabe flag and the fierce eyes of young engineers who had never built a single road in their lives, until now. And yet this was no accident, no miracle of chance. It was the result of something far deeper, a battle for economic freedom that had been quietly unfolding beneath the surface for years. The truth, like gold buried beneath the earth, had been hidden for decades. And Traoré, the soldier who became president, began digging where no leader dared. He started not with speeches, but with silence. Not with headlines, but with spreadsheets. For months, Traoré and his inner circle audited every mine, every export record, every offshore account linked to Burkina Faso's natural resources. And what they found was staggering. In 50 years, foreign mining giants had extracted over $600 billion worth of gold, copper, and other minerals from Burkina Faso. Yet less than $10 billion had ever entered the nation's treasury. The rest vanished into European banks, Canadian trusts, and Australian shell companies. Burkina Faso was not poor. It was plundered. But Traoré knew numbers alone would not win this war. So he built an economic resistance. He froze new mining licenses. He nationalized dormant mining zones. And he placed a special audit on every foreign company operating in the country. For 6 months, his team worked in complete secrecy. Informants were planted in company offices. Drones mapped mining sites from above. Satellite imagery tracked trucks smuggling minerals across borders. Financial algorithms cross-checked export data with actual ground extraction. And the results exposed a crime of epic proportions. Foreign companies were reporting only 10% of their true production. If they mined 100 tons of gold, they declared just 10. The rest disappeared silently into the global black market. Traoré spoke to his cabinet one evening, voice calm but resolute. "For years, the wealth of our people filled European vaults, while our children walked barefoot on the same soil that made billionaires elsewhere. This ends now." And so began Operation Sovereign Gold. Every mining company was ordered to submit their last 10 years of financial records. Refusal was not an option. Compliance was mandatory under penalty of expulsion, and when the documents arrived, they confirmed the theft. Goldmax Corporation, one of the largest mining firms on Earth, had extracted $700 million worth of gold in 2020 alone, but paid only $7 million in taxes. Western Mining falsified invoices reporting gold sales at a fraction of market value. Pacific Resources inflated miners' wages on paper to claim massive tax deductions, while workers still earned barely enough to eat. But the corruption went deeper than corporate greed. It was political rot. In 2015, a former energy minister had accepted a $60 million bribe to slash mining taxes from 30% to 3%. In 2018, the brother of a former president secretly granted 3 new gold concessions in exchange for $100 million, displacing over 45,000 villagers from ancestral lands. Traoré had seen enough. This was not business. This was economic warfare. And so he struck first. He froze all offshore accounts linked to these companies. He seized their in-country assets. And most importantly, he placed the nation's gold reserves under direct state control. The gold that once disappeared overseas now sat in secure vaults beneath Ouagadougou, estimated to be worth over $100 billion. But this was not just about numbers. It was about justice. For decades, Burkina Faso had been forced to beg for foreign loans, while its true wealth was stolen in plain sight. Each year, the IMF lent Burkina Faso $100 million, while foreign companies exported billions. Now Traoré declared the era of begging was over. He stood before his nation and said, "We will build our roads, our hospitals, and our schools with our own gold, not with their permission, but with our will." And the people believed him. In the markets of Ouagadougou, traders whispered his name with awe. In the dusty villages of the Sahel, children sang about new roads coming to their towns. But not everyone celebrated. In Paris, in London, and in Washington, officials watched with alarm. Phone calls flooded the embassies in Burkina Faso. Sanctions were discussed. Warnings were issued. But Traoré was unmoved. "They threatened us with aid cuts," he said with a faint smile. "But tell me what aid is greater than our own stolen gold?" And so the battle lines were drawn. On one side, a small African nation reclaiming its destiny. On the other, the old powers of finance and influence, desperate to hold on. But Traoré was not fighting for headlines. He was fighting for roads. Real roads. Ones that would connect farmers to markets, children to schools, patients to hospitals. Roads that would stitch together a nation long torn apart by poverty and neglect. And beneath the roar of bulldozers, one truth echoed louder than ever before. This was never about building roads. This was about rebuilding a country's soul. They called it the Impossible Project. But across Burkina Faso, engines roared to life, and the impossible became a question of will. Traoré did not break ground with ribbon-cutting ceremonies or televised speeches. He broke ground with command orders. In every province, from the rebel-controlled red zones to the sleepy towns forgotten by maps, construction battalions assembled. Young engineers, many fresh out of school, led units like battlefield commanders. Machine operators, mechanics, surveyors, and apprentices formed what Traoré called the infrastructure army. But this was no metaphor. Each region was divided into operational sectors. Each sector received clear objectives, deadlines, and logistical support. Failure to meet targets wasn't a project delay. It was a breach of national duty. At daybreak, bulldozers flattened ancient dirt trails into smooth foundations. At nightfall, road rollers thundered through danger zones under the glow of floodlights, reclaiming land once occupied by armed rebels. And in the command center in Ouagadougou, Traoré monitored every kilometer with encrypted updates, GPS tracking, and drone surveillance. He didn't ask for progress reports. He demanded real-time execution. No excuses, no bureaucracy, just work. Fosso Mebo, as the operation came to be known, was not run by politicians in suits. It was run like a war for economic survival. Each kilometer of road was a battlefield. Each road crew was a combat unit. And every completed stretch of asphalt was a victory reclaimed from decades of dependency. The project didn't wait for peace talks. It didn't negotiate with insecurity. It built through it. Where others waved white flags, Traoré's machines rolled forward. But how was this possible? The answer lay in the project's DNA. Fosso Mebo refused to outsource its future. No foreign firms won contracts. No foreign consultants controlled the budget. Every dollar came from Burkina Faso's own reclaimed gold reserves and taxes on corporations that once paid nothing. The equipment wasn't rented. It was bought outright. Burkina Faso now owned its bulldozers, its rollers, its graders. This wasn't just a road project. It was an economic declaration. No more mortgages on our future. No more begging for roads to reach our own villages. And while the world watched in disbelief, the work began. In 2 months, over 900 machines had been deployed across 18 provinces. In 6 months, over 100-200 kilometers of new roads were laid down, roads that connected farmers to markets, students to schools, and ambulances to forgotten clinics. The world's financial elites called it reckless. They said Burkina Faso would bankrupt itself. But on the ground it felt like resurrection. Villagers who had never seen asphalt now stood in the middle of brand new highways. Children climbed rooftops just to watch the road crews work, marveling at a future they were told would never come. And behind each machine was a story. There was Aisha, a 23-year-old engineering graduate who commanded a 50-person construction unit. Last year she sold fruit on the roadside. Today she led her team through red zones where no company dared to build. There was Mamadou, a former miner laid off by foreign corporations. Today he operated a road roller, carving through hills his ancestors once farmed. And there was Ibrahim Traoré, the man who visited construction sites at dawn, boots muddy, jacket dusty, shoulder to shoulder with the workers. He wasn't a leader watching from a palace. He was a soldier still marching. But even in this momentum, Traoré knew this was just the beginning. He stood before his commanders one night and said, "We are not laying roads. We are laying the veins of a nation. If they flow, the body lives. If they fail, the body dies." And so Fosso Mebo became more than a project. It became a national oath. An oath to the children who once died because ambulances couldn't reach them. An oath to the farmers whose crops rotted on broken roads. An oath to the youth who once dreamed of fleeing but now stayed to build. Across the country, something began to change. In remote towns, young people stopped leaving. They started opening shops, garages, schools, because now there were roads to bring customers, students, and goods. The economy began to breathe again. But Traoré knew the fight wasn't over. He expected backlash. And it came swift and sharp. Foreign investors froze deals. Western media began to smear his government, calling Fosso Mebo a dictatorship of asphalt. They mocked his vision as naive nationalism. But Traoré was unmoved. He stood before his nation once more and said, "Let them call us what they want. But we will no longer ask for permission to build our own future." And across the hills beneath the desert skies, the machines kept marching. Because for the first time in generations, Burkina Faso was building without fear, and the earth beneath their feet trembled not from bombs, but from bulldozers carrying hope. For decades, the countryside of Burkina Faso was a forgotten shadow. Children walked miles through dust to find water. Farmers harvested crops that rotted on the roadside because trucks refused to come. And when sickness struck, it was not the disease that killed first, it was the distance. But then the roads came, not grand highways for tourists, not luxury lanes for diplomats, but simple asphalt veins that connected a nation's beating heart to its forgotten limb. In the northern plains of Kaya, farmers once waited 3 days to sell a sack of onions at the provincial market. By the time they arrived, the onions had wilted, the prices had collapsed, and half their harvest was lost to mud and breakdowns. Now, with the new roads, it took 4 hours. Prices doubled. Spoilage dropped to near zero. And for the first time, farmers returned home with profit. Not loss. In the Sahel region, women who once carried firewood for kilometers now operated collective transport cooperatives, sharing trucks, managing routes, setting prices. Markets that once opened once a week now opened every day. Villages once too dangerous to visit became hubs of trade. And across these rural crossroads, something unexpected happened. Roadside repair shops appeared overnight. Small gas stations pumped life into dusty corners of the map. Cafes opened where people once sat in silence, waiting for help that never came. In Zunveyogo, a merchant stood by his shop and smiled as trucks rumbled by. "Before we waited for buyers to find us," he said. "Now they call us for directions." It wasn't just asphalt. It was visibility. It was recognition. When a road arrives at your village, it is not just a line on a map. It is a message that says, "You matter." But the greatest transformation wasn't in the economy. It was in the hearts of the young. For years, Burkina Faso's youth were labeled the lost generation, trapped between poverty and migration, between unemployment and extremism. No jobs, no future, no place to belong. But Fosso Mebo changed that. Tens of thousands of young people once left behind were called to build. Not with promises, but with contracts. Not with slogans, but with real work. Some learned to operate bulldozers. Some became site supervisors. Others measured distances, poured concrete, and ran logistics. In a dusty village of Bobo Dioulasso, a 22-year-old woman named Aicha said it best. "Last year I sold mango juice on the roadside. Today I lead a team paving 20 kilometers of road. And for the first time, they got paid on time, with real contracts, with promotions, with recognition. The construction sites became classrooms, the roads became graduation projects, and the nation itself became their future employer. But this was not just economic revival. It was moral restoration. Burkina Faso was reclaiming its right to move, to work, to build. No longer waiting for IMF approvals, no longer waiting for development plans signed in Paris or Brussels, no longer waiting for help from those who once held them down. Instead, the country looked inward and found something stronger, its own will. And the people responded. Teachers who once fled to the cities returned to rural schools because now they could reach them. Doctors no longer feared getting stranded en route to village clinics. Entrepreneurs opened shops in places where customers could finally arrive. And slowly life returned. But in the midst of this quiet revolution, Traoré stood vigilant. He knew the world was watching. Western headlines mocked Fosso Mebo as a reckless gamble. Financial analysts predicted bankruptcy. Aid agencies warned of collapse without foreign loans. But in the markets, the schools, and the hospitals, the story was different. The economy grew. Unemployment dropped. The poverty rate began to fall. And in the eyes of the people, something more powerful than statistics took root. Hope. Traoré visited a newly paved village one morning and met an old farmer named Amadou. Amadou had worked his fields for 40 years, watching his crops die by the roadside, watching his children grow without schools, watching his neighbors abandon their homes. With tears in his eyes, Amadou looked at the president and said, "I never thought I would live to see this day. For the first time in my life, my village is not a place to escape from. It is a place worth staying in." Traoré placed a hand on his shoulder and replied softly, And this is just the beginning. But deep down he knew the battle was far from over. Beyond the hills, the critics sharpened their knives. Western powers, unable to control the narrative, prepared their next move. And while roads stretched across Burkina Faso, storms gathered abroad. But for now, the people built. And as long as they built, they were free. Because a nation that builds together can no longer be broken apart. And then, as the roads stretched farther, the silence was broken. Western media fired their first salvos. They called Traoré a populist, a dictator, a reckless gambler. They warned that Burkina Faso was heading for disaster. They mocked Fosso Mebo as asphalt nationalism, a doomed attempt to escape global financial order. CNN, BBC, Reuters. They all wrote the same story. You cannot build without loans, you cannot thrive without the IMF. But while they wrote, the ground kept changing. In just 1 year, Burkina Faso's economy grew by 300%. More than 500 new schools were built. Over 200 hospitals opened their doors. 5,000 kilometers of roads transformed regions long forgotten by maps. Electricity reached 2,000 villages that had lived in darkness for generations. Access to clean drinking water reached over 3 million people. Farmers' incomes doubled, and for the first time, the country's budget surplus exceeded its entire foreign aid intake. While the world watched for failure, the people built their future. The IMF called emergency meetings. The European Union debated sanctions. The United States threatened to cut financial aid. But Traoré stood firm. Aid, he asked with a faint smile. The $100 million they send us each year, we make that in a week from our own mines. Keep your aid, give it to your puppet states. We no longer kneel. And across the continent, something stirred. In Mali, leaders launched their own national road projects. In Guinea, bauxite mines were nationalized. In Niger, uranium contracts were rewritten. One by one, the old agreements crumbled. A new wind swept through Africa. But the most powerful reaction did not come from governments. It came from the people. In markets from Bamako to Kinshasa, young Africans spoke of Burkina Faso as a beacon. Engineers in Accra studied the Fosso Mebo model. Activists in Lagos shared the story online. We do not need rescuers. We need space to build ourselves. And in Burkina Faso itself, the people answered Traoré's call. The workers didn't wait for foreign investment to continue. They invested in their own cooperatives. They opened roadside businesses, repair shops, schools, and clinics. Each kilometer of asphalt wasn't just a road. It was a stage where a forgotten people became visible again. Traoré stood before a crowd of thousands in Ouagadougou and spoke quietly but firmly. We are not enemies of the world. Our door is open to every nation that offers honest trade. But to those who came to plunder, your era is over. Africa's resources belong to African people. It really is that simple. And in that moment, it wasn't just roads they had built. They had paved a new chapter in Africa's story. The world could no longer laugh, because the dust of Burkina Faso was turning into gold beneath the wheels of its own people. And so in the quiet corners of Burkina Faso, something extraordinary happened. Children who once walked barefoot through dust now walked on asphalt, dreaming not of escape, but of becoming engineers, builders, and leaders of their homeland. Farmers no longer waited for traders from the cities. They drove their harvest to markets with pride on roads built by their own hands. Teachers who once fled returned to classrooms filled with light. Clinics once abandoned now echoed with laughter and healing. And across these roads, something deeper traveled.